would imagine this is much more common than we would think. My guess is that it's more common that for a quarterback specifically, that you would include them in these decisions versus like what we saw happen a couple years ago with Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers when they drafted Jordan Love and didn't tell him at all. Like it is your quarterback. It is your franchise. So when you're going to make a big decision, like who you're going to take at wide receiver, if you're going to take a backup or a future, typically it would be recommended that you keep that person involved. If the Houston Texans, which I know neither of us want them to do, take a wide receiver in this year's draft, it seems overkill at this point. But if they wanted to take a wide receiver or a tight end in this draft, is that something that you really want CJ Stroud having massive input on?
I get nervous with this. I feel in 2024, we've gotten to a point when it comes to accommodating star players in all sports that sometimes we're, I think, being a little bit too giving. Mm-hmm. You're seeing it a lot with NBA stars, but you're starting to see it in football. And there are lots of fan bases who believe that their quarterbacks, if they're good enough, should have a lot of input in what the team does. Mm-hmm. I experienced this up in Seattle when Russell Wilson was still good. There was a large faction of Seahawks fans who believed that Russell Wilson should have input in what the Seahawks do during the offseason. And this goes also back to how I was feeling last offseason, where we heard that CJ Stroud had spoken with Tank Dell.
Yeah.
And I rolled my eyes a little bit because they had just drafted CJ Stroud the day before. What, they're going to bring him into their room and ask him, "Ooh, what do you think about Tank Dell the next day?" But okay, he's been here for a year and he was awesome. Does that mean he deserves to have input? And I'm always going to say no. Here's why I'm going to say no. It's not because I don't think CJ Stroud knows who's good and who's bad. It's because there are people who are paid to do this. And I'm assuming that because they're paid to do this, that they're going to be better at evaluating talent than CJ Stroud might.
Yeah, and someone here on the Twitch says CJ was the reason they drafted Tank Dell, to what you were saying as well. I don't believe
that's not true. It's just not true. Imagine that they did that.
I mean, if they did, then
they're not a professional operation if they actually did that.
There's no way that Nick Caserio was like, we're just going to draft Tank Dell just because CJ Stroud told us to.
Especially because Tank Dell played here at Houston. It was almost like having something in your backyard that other teams probably weren't quite as focused on. Because he's an undersized guy, but if you got to see him enough being here and in person a couple of times with whatever scouts you can send there, you're going to have a pretty good feel for who he is and who he isn't.
Yeah.
Stroud talking to him is not why the Texans drafted him. That is a myth and a half. And to where we're at today, Joe, seeing that the Ravens, I guess, are allowing Lamar Jackson to look at the film, that's good that they're allowing him to look at it. And maybe he's going to say, I like what this guy does, etc. But outside of offering a few words, I don't really want my quarterback to be involved in roster construction because they're going to get greedy by default. And that was the problem with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, every offseason, would be asking for the Seahawks to sign literally every single offensive lineman under the sun and every single receiver under the sun, or trade for them at the same time. And he was doing it with his annoying positivity message. And it got to the point where a friend of mine, but a guy who was his quarterback coach, who was also a radio host at that station, was doing the same thing and pushing for the Seahawks to just add everybody. There's a salary cap, 1 and 2. I'm sorry, I don't trust Russell Wilson's evaluation of every single player in the league. And with CJ Stroud, I'm going to hold him to that same standard. There are 0 players in the league that I would look at and say, this guy knows who's going to be good and who isn't coming out of college. People barely know that as it is. A guy who doesn't actually do this professionally is going to have an extra clue. Probably not.
And like what experiences he had with Tank Dell last year too was like when they were practicing together. Like they didn't even have, all they had was, I guess CJ could have watched film, but it's not what happens. Now I'm okay with input. I'm not okay with decision making. So like just using the Tank Dell as a comparison, let's just say CJ Stroud really was working out with Tank Dell last year, and which we know he was, and then they asked him Do you want to draft Tank, or do you want to draft, what do you know about Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver from Tennessee, or Cedric Tillman, who is also the wide receiver from Tennessee, who they went picked 73 and 74, Tank went number 69.
Nice.
If CJ Stroud was like, well, I know Tank, this is what I like about him, and I have watched Tennessee play for whatever reason, even though they're in the SEC, and I have these concerns about Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman, I'd be fine with you listening to your quarterback on that. But if Nick Caserio feels differently, then it should be his decision to continue this forward.
It is his decision,
yeah,
right?
And to continue this forward, we are walking into a year with the Houston Texans in which they have 5 wide receivers, I believe it is, who are going to hit free agency at the end of the season. Headlined, of course, by Stephon Diggs and both Nico Collins. CJ Stroud should have some say in which wide receiver he likes more. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because Nick Caserio has to sign the one that he believes is best for this team and to the best contract of this team. Just like Dalton Schultz, we saw CJ Stroud just talk glowingly about the connection that CJ Stroud had with that him and Schultz had together this offseason. Well, it shouldn't be the only reason why Schultz is back. It can have impact. But Nick Caserio is the one who will ultimately lose his job if things go wrong, not CJ Stroud.
Bad organizations let the players have the power in this situation. And to what you're saying, I agree. Where I would draw the line is if Stroud has thrown to this person before, either he's at Ohio State or they have worked together at some sort of off-season camp, whether it's all the way back in high school or leading up to the draft, I'll listen to him. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And you just can't overpromise because that's what really ultimately, it wasn't just the massages that was the beginning of the downfall of the relationship with Deshaun Watson. Like, you go back in time and think about it, it's Cal McNair made a mistake. Cal McNair promised, and Jack Easterby, they promised Deshaun Watson that he would be involved in the GM search.
Which was dumb.
And then
I can't believe that they did that. That I mean, you want to talk about how far they've come over the last couple of years. It's so huge that they got away from that. That was moronic.
Yeah, and they had Deshaun Watson's approval on a candidate. It was Omar Khan, who is now the GM of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then while Deshaun Watson was in Cancun, Jack Easterby got in a plane and flew to Carolina, and they hired Nick Caserio. So, and then that's when 2 days later, the first question from John McClain to Nick Caserio was not about taking the job. It was hey man, we're hearing Deshaun Watson doesn't want to be here anymore. So that should be, hopefully, as the Texans organization has grown, and what Nick Caserio has seen with the Patriots and the way they did things there, CJ can have input, but you can't promise him say. And if you do promise him say, that you got to let him have it. That's the other thing too.
But don't.
But please don't.
Please don't. Because, yeah, that's what it opens itself up to. You're right. And he is a David Mulugeta client. So, most powerful agent in the NFL.
He absolutely is.
He can figure a way out of Houston. That's for damn sure.